So in this Torah portion, we have three main things that I have brought out here, which is light of the menorah, the sanctification of the Levites, and some grumbling of the lusters. So we'll deal with some of these things and a little bit more. But I want to point out that with just a little bit of background information, that you'll see that we have left Egypt and we have come to Mount Sinai. We got instructions on the tabernacle. We got instructions on sanctification and setting up the priesthood and building all the stuff. And they inaugurated the priesthood and the fire came down from heaven. And now we are going to do we get a little bit more instruction regarding the tabernacle. And that is regarding the whole tribe of Levi. Before we were just dealing with the priestly family of Aaron. And now we're dealing a little bit with the whole tribe of Levi. But note that we have been at Mount Sinai for 1 year and approximately 20 days. Now, we're about to move out. There's actually instructions in this Torah portion regarding the building of silver trumpets and the certain sounds that you're supposed to make to call the people to battle, to call the people to meetings, to organize the hosts of Israel to begin moving. Like if they blow a certain sound, then the divisions of Israel will move out. And remember that there are 4 divisions of 3 tribes each. And you can look that up online. It's quite fascinating, actually, to see how the tribes are laid out around the tabernacle. And when you blow these silver trumpets that we're hearing about, and by the way, only the priesthood blows the silver trumpets. As far as I know, as my research indicated, that the shofar, the ram's horn, is generally only blown by lower priests and the common people. But it was only the priests who were allowed to blow these silver trumpets. And when they would blow these silver trumpets, the first division, headed by Judah, would move out, and then they would break apart the tabernacle, and the certain parts of the tribe of Levi would go in between these divisions, depending upon the order of how Yuvah wanted them to move and to be able to reorganize and establish the tabernacle in the place that they were going to go to next. It's all very, very highly organized and fascinating. But then, you blow the trumpet, and the next division, led by Reuben, I believe it is, as the leader of the second division, would move out, and so on and so forth. But recognize here that the whole of Israel has been at the base of Mount Sinai for 1 year and just a little over 1 year. And they're about to break camp and begin moving towards the Promised Land. Now, when I say that to you, that we've been hanging out at Mount Sinai for approximately 1 year, does that ring any bells for anybody? Why would it be? You might think, well, it took a year to organize things and build a tabernacle and whatnot. Does the indication regarding 1 year speak to any of you about anything you've heard before that you might think of? That's okay if you have not. I want to take you to, briefly, you should be able to see my screen whether I switch from my PowerPoint to the Bible or whatever. I'm going to go to the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 20. Excuse me. So, yes, I'm going to Deuteronomy, chapter 20. Hopefully you can see that. I'm going to switch from the Net Bible to the NASB. Now, interesting, if you look at Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 6, I know that you've heard of this before. It says here, "Who is the man that has planted a vineyard and has not begun to use its fruit? Let him depart and return to his house, otherwise he might die in the battle, and another man would begin to use its fruit. And who is the man that is engaged to a woman and has not married her? Let him depart and return to his house, otherwise he might die in the battle, and another man would marry her. You realize, I hope, that what is happening here with this stay at Mount Sinai is that God is dwelling with his bride. It is Hebrew tradition, this is not written into the Torah, that a man will stay with his bride for 1 year before having to join the military. And it seems to be tied in here very clearly to me that God is spending the first year of the marriage in covenant fellowship, getting to know. It's like you know, that first year of marriage, you're getting to know each other. You're learning the rules of how to get along. What is she like? What is she not like? What does he want? What does he not want? This, I think, speaks to that we have spent a year at Mount Sinai getting to know our God and him revealing himself to us. And there's that period of seclusion and intimacy between God and his people during that 1 year. And now, just after the year is over, he's ready to begin moving the people. And what he first does before they begin to move out is he begins to talk with them about the menorah. Now, there's just a little passage here that is quite odd at the beginning of Numbers chapter 10, where it says, that's Numbers chapter 8, It says, "Speak to Aaron and say to him, when you mount the lamps, the 7 lamps will give light in the front of the lampstand." Aaron therefore did so. He mounted its lamps at the front of the lampstand, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. Now this was the workmanship of the lamp: hammered work of gold, from its base to its flowers it was hammered work, according to the pattern which the Lord had shown Moses, so he made the lampstand. Now that is a really strange little passage there, where we've already heard about the lampstand and how it was made and what they need to do to light it and whatnot. Why is this stuck in here? I frankly don't know the answer to why this particular, and it's also worded very strangely. I encourage you to make a little note to look into that. If you have a Chumash and some commentary, take a look at it. I think you'll be surprised by some of the interesting commentary about this section. But I just wanted to bring out a couple of things. It occurred to me as I was pondering, why is this little section regarding the menorah stuck in here again? I had a question. It seems to me, both from Hebrew tradition, in the Talmud and in the Mishnah, and also Josephus writes about this, and there seems to be a fairly clear indication of it in the Torah, that the lamps are lighted in the evening, roughly 3 or 4 o'clock, and this menorah is to burn all night long throughout the night, and that in the morning it's fine if it goes out, and then you rearrange the wicks and you light this thing, fill it up with oil, and you relight it again at the end of the day to burn throughout the night inside the tabernacle. Now I thought to myself, why? Why would we burn this light inside the tabernacle when no one's in there? There's nothing happening. I don't know of any service that is happening inside the tabernacle throughout the dead of night. It didn't make any sense to me why that light would burn in the tabernacle all night long. Does anyone have any insight into why that might be? It made me think of this. There's a certain passage, I can't remember where it's from, you'll probably be able to tell me. It says in the New Testament that there in God is no darkness or shifting shadow. And it kind of made me think of the fact that there really is no darkness with our God, and that this is a potentially a symbolic representation of that his with his dwelling place is pure light, and there is no shifting shadow, and that this menorah being lit throughout the night means that it occurred to me, well, there surely during the day there wouldn't have been a whole lot of light inside that place, because it's covered pretty well with a bunch of curtains, and I don't know how, maybe the front was open. We don't really know about the front. I know that in certain of the little models that you can see that there is some kind of an opening in the front, but I got to say that back portion where the Ark of the Covenant is, that had to be fairly dark, unless, and certainly some of the rabbinic commentators would say that the light of God is shining from the tabernacle, but that's certainly possible. Angela, would you like to speak? What do you?
I was just thinking that he's clothed in darkness.
He's cloaked in darkness. That's certainly possible. I mean, that keporet, that curtain that is separating the Holy of Holies from the holy place, even if the menorah was lit, it's not going to penetrate that veil, I wouldn't think. It's a fairly thick curtain, and it's certainly going to. And this is a fairly small place. If you've looked at the calculations for how big this thing is, it's not very big. But
you're thinking too much with what your eyes can see and not see.
Well, and I tried to think about not just what my eyes would see, but spiritually, and the only thing I could think of is that there's got to be light inside there. For whatever reason, it's like the light of, I know that his word is a light, and I know that we need to shine the light of his word on the darkest corners of our souls. Every nook and cranny of our lives need to have that light shined into those dark corners to illuminate us. But it was, thank you, Marie, that's a good insight. Every perfect gift coming down from above comes down from the Father of lights, from whom there is no shifting shadow or darkness of turning. Yeah, something like that. That's a great insight. So I just consider that. I'm not really certain about the answer. I was just curious, and I'm just sometimes I'll just bring questions to you that I don't know the answer to, but there's something there.
Hey, Alan, I got a little something that might help. I don't know.
Yeah, throw it out there, Jimbo. What do you got?
Yeah. With 7 little lamps on one side of the tabernacle, I think that there would have been shadow. Coming from one side, there's only one source.
Sure.
And if you look at the tabernacle as being an immature person, as a brand new believer, there's a lot of darkness inside of us. But if you'll look at Solomon's temple as being a more mature believer, there's 5 menorahs on the left and 5 on the right, and there's a lot less chance of a real pronounced shadow. And then in the final stage, there is no need for a sun, because the whole city, everything's just illuminated by the presence of God, and that's the fully perfected. I see it as a fully mature, fully perfected, and by that I mean miraculously completed human being, who's everything that God wants him to be. Yeah. There's no darkness there.
Yeah, no, that's good insight. That's good insight. I see John in darkness. Hello, John. Yeah. It's delightful to see you, John. We were just talking about the darkness where the menorah is shining in the tabernacle. You look like you're in a darkened tabernacle. I can see your lamp. It's a beautiful lamp. So that was just a comment. Now, I want to move next to show you I don't want to show you something. I want to talk briefly about the sanctification of the Levites. Now, remember that before, the priests themselves were sanctified. through this ritual of an 8-day ritual. And now the servants of the people are actually being sanctified, which is the whole tribe of Levi. Remember that their job is not to burn incense in the temple, not to they can tend to the altar and certainly do a lot of jobs. There's a lot of jobs that need to be done. These are your lower order of servants. They are not priests. Remember that all priests are Levites, but not all Levites are priests. So that the whole tribe of Levi is there to serve God and to be intermediaries between God and the people, to build and to take apart the tabernacle, carry its certain components. We know that later they will be teachers to the tribes of Israel. They'll be some of them itinerant, wandering around to the different tribes when they get settled into the land. They will have their own cities, but they have a whole host of jobs. But now we have to sanctify the actual Levites and not just the priests. So what's interesting is that it literally says in the book of Numbers that you have the Levites actually waved. You shall wave the sons of Levi, which is quite fascinating. And the Torah commentators say that they did literally, that the high priest Aaron somehow literally picked up these people and waved them like a wave offering. Literally picked up these people. That's just, it's crazy. It sounds ridiculous.
What's this word for wave?
Wave, I do not know. Look it up. What do you see?
Where is it?
Oh, it's in, I believe that's in Numbers chapter 10. The waving of the Levites, a wave offering, chapter 10, verse 11. It says, Aaron then shall present the Levites before the Lord as a wave offering from the sons of Israel. So they do the Shemitah, and they put their hands on it's like the leaders of the tribes of Israel place their hands on the heads of the Levites, and then they are presented as a wave offering. It is supposed through the commentators, the early commentators, that what actually is happening here is that the leadership of the 12 tribes had the privilege of being the spiritual heads of the tribes, but that they lost that privilege and that authority when the incident of the golden calf happened. Because you remember that at the first when God came down on Sinai, there was nothing mentioned about the Levites. All we know is that Moses and Aaron were from the tribe of Levi, and they were leading the people. There was nothing spoken about a priesthood necessarily. But it's only after the people sinned with the golden calf and the sons of Levi did not engage with the sin of the golden calf, is what is supposed. Because when Moses comes down the mountain and the people are frolicking and having this party with the golden calf, and we know that Aaron got involved for sure, but it is said that Moses spoke and said, whoever is with me, come over here. And the sons of Levi joined him, and they strapped on weapons and waded through the crowd, killing people who were apparently the leaders of this idolatrous rebellion. And so the sons of Levi were given the rights of the firstborn that had been given to the firstborn sons of all the tribes and their leadership. Remember that when there were, at the very beginning, there was 70 elders who were put together from the 12 tribes who went up on the mountain and had some type of a meal with God, it says. But they apparently lost this responsibility, this privilege of serving. And it was now here in Numbers chapter, I believe we're in chapter 10 now. Maybe we're not. I'm sorry. I think we might still be in chapter 8. I apologize. That now the sons of Levi are given that privilege, and it is taken away from the firstborn sons of Israel. Angela, do you have something to say? She's making a whole bunch of gestures over there.
I'm trying to understand wave because it's a weird word.
Weird word, wave. Yes.
Not like this. I think it has something to do with
well,
up and down, lifting off.
Yes. Okay. So Angela has been looking up this weird word wave
like
in the Torah.
Quiver to vibrate up and down and rock to and fro.
Yes, up and down and to and fro, and that's why when you see
attached to the earth, but you're not at the same time.
yes, so when you see a Levite who is waving a wave offering of some type, you can see this in that movie about Sukkot. When that movie regarding Sukkot, where they have their lulav and their etrog and they're waving them up and down and left and right and backward and forward. That is how you actually wave a wave offering, and that's what they do on Shavuot. That was just here last weekend. When you're waving the first grain offerings of the wheat, or the loaves of bread, or the first offering just after Passover, where you're waving barley, front and back, left and right, up and down. It is said in the commentaries that somebody actually picked up the members of the tribes of Levi and actually shook them around. Kind of strange, but
lift up, offer, perfume. It's like some way of giving to him without burning it.
yes, it's like an elevation offering without burning it. Yes, that is absolutely. That's a good way to look at it. So these Levites are actually waved like first fruits offerings before Yuvav, and they are now set apart to be intermediaries with the people.
Those little ladders,
like Jacob's ladder. Yeah, Angela.
Touch the earth, up and down.
Oh, Angela is making an interesting
A connector.
A connector. Yeah.
Which is what Levi is.
Levi is a connector. That is correct. Well, if you look at Levi's name, when his mother gave birth to him, she named him, now my husband will be attached to me or joined to me. Levi is a joiner, and so he is joining. That was probably a prophetic utterance from his mother when she gave birth to him. She used it in the sense of, now my husband will be attached to me, but perhaps God inspired her to mean, I'm going to attach the greater house of Israel to me through the intermediaries of the Levitical priesthood. Now, I think that this last little section that we get in the book of Numbers regarding the priesthood and the Levitical tribes that actually are, I think Carlos said, the Hebrews, when they pray, they wave like that. They kind of move back and forth. That is potentially true. I think what I want to bring to your attention in regards to this, the divisions of the house of Israel. Think about this. Think about a spiritual understanding of the whole house of God and how it radiates out from the center where the tabernacle is. We have God in the house. We have the priests. We have the faithful. We have the casual. And we have the ungodly. Now, I have put these into my own little terms, but think about that for just a moment. You've got God in the center, moving out one ring or rung of the ladder, if you want. You have the high priest. And out one rung from that, you have the priesthood. Out one rung from that, you have the Levites. Then out one rung from that, you have the tribes of Israel. Then out one rung from that, you have the nations. Do you see how the spiritual connectivity to God is lessened as you move further out from that tabernacle? And I think you can see that today in today's world. We don't have a tabernacle and we don't have a priesthood, but we do kind of. That the Holy Spirit is dwelling in the believer because of our high priest Yeshua, who connected us to God as an intermediary, sent us his Holy Spirit. And today in this world we have those who are truly connected to God, the faithful. The faithful. Then outside on the edges of the camp, you have the mixed multitude, which we're going to hear about them in just a little bit. I would call them the casual. And then outside of that circle, you have the ungodly, the heathen, the pagans, whatever you want to call them. That is still true to this day. That you have a small, faithful remnant of believers in God who are fully dedicated, doing the best they can, all kinds of messing up, of course. They're not perfect, but they're serious about God. They're trying to be. They pray. They try to trust in him. They're trying to be an example to others and a light to the world around them. And then there's a whole boatload of people who are just kind of casual. And then there's a host of ungodly people on the outside. So it's an interesting study to look at the array of God's people and the mixed multitude, and then the pagans outside of that, arranged around this tabernacle and how it's all flowing out. And the further you get away from that tabernacle, the more darkness there is, which is another metaphor regarding this light that is shining. Now, I'm going to move forward just a little bit. Next, we have some instructions regarding the second Passover. Now, the second Passover, of course, you guys know about this because some of us, because we couldn't get together, we didn't actually have a normal Passover where we would actually get together and eat together. But some of you, probably observed a second Passover. Others of you observed the first one. But, this is the only Moedim appointed time of God that gets a do-over. And that's significant. There is no other Moedim of God that gets a do-over. And I think it's because this is such a... Thank you, Maria. I think that's absolutely right. We've talked about that before regarding the getting closer and closer to God and getting further and further away from God. It's also reflected in the book of the Revelation near the end in chapter 22. And other places in the Gospels as well. Good insight. But in regard to Passover, this gets a do-over. You get a do-over for Passover because it is so centrally significant to our faith. And who just made that comment? I just saw it out of the corner of my eye. The Hebrew peoples who missed the first Advent will hopefully get their chance to set that right when he comes back the second time. That's a good insight. That certainly could be. That's an interesting observation. But yeah, so if you're on a journey or ceremonially unclean, you are now getting instructions regarding how to observe the second Passover. Note that there is no second week of unleavened bread. And in Hebrew tradition, they just ate matzah with their meal for Passover. But then there's you eat the unleavened bread for the Passover meal. But then there's not a week of unleavened bread after that. The only instructions that are given are if you missed it the first time, then you catch it the second time around. Now, there is a question that many people have asked, why are these people defiled and unable to, because there were some people who were defiled by a dead body who came to Moses and said, why should we not get to partake of the Passover? because we were ceremonially unclean because of a dead body. Well, what are these people doing playing with dead bodies? Where do these dead bodies come from? Is this just people that happened to die and that they were, needing to be buried or something during the first Passover? It's certainly possible. But tradition states that it was actually Israelites who were responsible for carrying the bones of Joseph, because he did make them swear to take his bones with them. He said, God will revisit you and take you out of here. Make sure you take me with you. He didn't want to be left in Egypt. Now that is a picture in and of itself, because of the picture that the Messiah and Joseph represent together. It's like, when you're leaving Egypt, make sure you take my body with you. I think that's an interesting metaphor to think about just right there by itself. Now, the next little section that I want to talk about is this pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire that is transporting, that is taking them wherever they go, that God's presence is very visibly with them, because we have a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire by night that is still there. We have no indication that this fire and cloud ever went away. It led them out of Egypt, and it has been with them every day. But and you see the people making all kinds of stupid mistakes and stupid decisions when the presence of God is with them every single day. And that is such a powerful lesson to think about, that there are obvious signs. And I'm thinking of the introduction to the book of Romans, where Paul talks about, the person who wants to quash God and his presence in the world and deny his existence, or just be blind to the many manifold demonstrations of his power that are all around us. But we can, all of us, very easily lose sight of the presence of God. And unfortunately, these people too did also. These people did too. They lost sight of the fact that cloud and that pillar was right there with them every single day. But here's the key point about this. The Israelites, it says in this section that the cloud would sometimes just pick up and go without just a moment's notice. And then it would plop down after only having traveled for maybe a few miles. And then it would put down, and it would stay there for, could be a month, it could be a year. And then, just unexpectedly, it would pick up and move again. And it might only move for like a day, and then it would plop down. Sometimes it would have them travel for a couple of days without rest. And they would be, goodness gracious, this is tough. It really kept them on their toes, just from what I understand from the commentary. That God was keeping them on their toes. They would settle down in a place, and God would let them linger there. And they would think, oh man, we've been in this place for a long time. And they would start to put down a little bit of roots in the ground. And then once they got comfortable and started planting a little bit of roots, so to speak, God would move that cloud, and they would have to pick up and leave. They thought, wow, we thought we were going to be here for a good amount of time, man. 6 months had gone by. We figured we were kind of settling here for a little while, but not so. God said, nope, we're moving. Now, that is such an amazing picture for us, that we have to be tuned in to what God, the movement of God in our lives, that we have to be tuned in. If and unfortunately for many of us, we can stay in our tent. We can stay rooted in the ground in our tent, and the pillar of cloud has got up and taken off. And the people, many of the people, the faithful, have gone away. And there's a bunch of stragglers sitting in the camp in their tents, wondering where the presence of God went. Yes, like the book Who Moved My Cheese. Indeed. So, we have to we have to be sensitive to the movement of the Spirit of God. And if you are not, if His presence is not with you, and you feel that He's far away, sometimes that happens. That's just life, folks. But it can be prolonged, and it can be a spiritual bit of darkness that comes over you because that fire that has been over the tent has moved off, and you're sitting in darkness. We need to be sensitive to that, to be aware of when the Spirit of God is saying get up and move, and when the Spirit of God is saying hunker down. I want you to stay here for a little while. But you got to be tuned in. You got to be a person of prayer. You got to be a person who is connected to Him through His Word, or you're simply not going to hear from Him. Remember, of course, this is the most basic and simple thing, and I feel stupid even saying it, but it's kind of hard to have a relationship with your wife if you never talk to her. So, you can't have a relationship with God unless you're speaking to Him. And the only way that you can speak to Him is by praying to Him. And He can't speak to you. Well, He can, but it's not quite as likely. He can't speak to you unless you're reading His Word. That's how He speaks to you. Of course, He can speak to you through the lives of other people and circumstances if you have the wisdom to see it, but many don't. But, the basic fundamental is listen for God's voice in your life by reading what He has to say to you. He's given you so much, and unfortunately, I think many of us are going to get to the end of the line here, and we're going to say, God, why weren't you speaking to us? He says, He's saying to you, man, I tried to speak to you. I wrote a whole dang book. It was a huge book. Maybe you've heard of it. You had 10 copies on your shelf. You just never, they were all dusty, and you never opened them up. I was trying to speak to you. And if you're too lazy to see what I was saying to you, I'm not going to give you a special message. I'm not going to send a prophet to speak to you in my name. You're obviously not that interested in hearing what I have to say, or you would have searched for me. Now, one other thing I want to bring out regarding this moving cloud. Something fascinating. I had a moment this week where I had woken up in the middle of the night, just popped awake at like 3:30 in the morning. That happens to me sometimes, Jimmy, and I know it happens to Jimmy. It happened to Jimmy last night, where I woke up at like 3:30 and I could just feel that I was awake and I wasn't going to go back to sleep. So I thought, okay, well, I got to do something. So I pulled open YouTube and I looked, and there on my feed was this interesting little video from a historian, because I have, my feed is filled with history stuff sometimes because I like history. And this history teacher was talking about something crazy that was going on in the world right at the time on the historical timeline when the children of Israel had just left Egypt. And this was quite fascinating. When the Roman Empire collapsed in I think it was like it was either 400 or 680. I can't remember. The German tribes invaded and sacked Rome. Alaric the Goth sacked Rome, and civilization fell, and the whole world was plunged into chaos and darkness, and civilized society just went out the window completely, and the whole world was buried in darkness for nearly 600 or 700 years. It was a huge amount of time. What's interesting is that scientists and archaeologists and historians know that something remarkably similar to that happened right at the time, right around the time frame of when these things were happening in Egypt, and the children of Israel were leaving the Promised Land. Now, I know that some of you have probably seen some documentaries or something that talk about the the miracles of the signs, the strokes that happened to the Egyptians in the judgments against their gods, and the river turning to blood, and the darkness and the hail and all this kind of stuff, that crops were devastated and whatnot. Now, I know that, we often have a picture in our minds of these weird, miraculous things that are just completely outside of nature. And that is certainly the case in some instances of when God is moving in a powerful way. But I think we need to recognize that many times God moves and demonstrates his power within nature, that it's not something unusual. I mean, certainly hailstones had fallen in Egypt before, but hailstones that were huge and on fire? I think that it's certainly possible that some of the things that happened when the children of Israel left Egypt were actually natural phenomenon that were taken to extreme lengths. And God sometimes does that. If you especially look at the book of the Revelation, you can see that many of the things that are happening seem like they could totally be natural phenomenon, but they're happening to such a degree and such a huge scale that it's like nothing like this has ever happened before. Yes, we've had storms. Yes, we've had comets strike the earth. Or yes, we've had the sun go dark for a short time because of an eclipse or something. But it's huge and it lasts for a long time, or it's really large, or it affects a tremendous amount of people. Now, why am I bringing this up? Because I'm thinking to myself as I'm watching this video or hearing it, that what's happening in the world is that catastrophe is happening. Remember that Egypt is the breadbasket of the world at this time. And if God has destroyed the crops, pretty much all of the crops of Egypt, there's very real likelihood that there's going to be a worldwide famine because of what happened to Egypt. Egypt is one of the most powerful places in the world at that time. But you can study the history, and right about that same time, the Hittite Empire collapsed and burned. The Babylonian Empire collapsed and burned. The Greeks collapsed and burned. And all of a sudden, everything's turned on its head right at the same time. And it's possible that whatever was happening with the natural world that God was using to strike blows against the Egyptians was turning the entire world on its head. Now, that's certainly an interesting thought, but I want you to think of this. If that is so, then consider this. There is a group of 3 to 5 million people wandering around the wilderness seemingly at random, led by a cloud and a pillar, being fed, being watered, being protected, being shielded, and being led around from place to place in the wilderness. Now, it just occurred to me that perhaps this seemingly random, the cloud will lift up and take off and, we're on our way again. It could be that God was protecting them from some roving band of rampaging, some tribe or group that was out looking for food. And God is protecting them and leading them precisely on this journey, and that there was no incident of a random picking up and moving along. It was all very carefully orchestrated to keep these people of God in safety. That is a fascinating idea to me, and it just lets me know that, and I know that you have read about this and you have thought about this, that there's nothing that happens for no reason. Everything that is happening in the world right now is happening for precisely God's purpose. The riots, the COVID-19, the economy collapsing, possibly rebounding, everything that is happening in your life, in the life of our community, in the life of our nation, and the whole world is happening precisely at the right time, and precisely for the right reason. And we need to remember that God is absolutely in charge of all of this, and He's orchestrating it for your blessing, for your protection, for your preservation, for your deliverance into His kingdom. Think about that. I think it's possible. I think it's possible. It's not only possible, it's highly likely. Sorry, I did not anticipate going this long, but here I am, waxing eloquent. What's that, Angela?
Eloquent?
Oh, sorry, I'm not eloquent. I'm just waxing. Prophetic shadows. My next little point. I want to point out something that's very interesting to you, and you can make of this what you will, but I think there may be some significance here. Note that in one of the little sections here, Jethro is addressed again. Now, this happened once before, where Jethro met them as they left Egypt and heard about the wonderful things that God had done, and he gave praise to God, and he offered sacrifice, and Moses said to him, "Hey, come with us." And there's some question about whether he actually did or not. We're not totally certain whether Jethro left with them. And yet here, and the rabbis say, yes, he did go with them. But here we are addressing the same issue again. That seemingly here's Jethro again, and they're saying, hey, come with us, because he's planning to leave. And I thought, well, this is certainly unusual. I thought we already dealt with Jethro taking off and going back to the land of Midian, but apparently not, because here he still is. And again, there's no real clear indication of whether he actually stayed or not. But of course, the rabbis say he did. He did stay. But interesting progression of events that I want to bring to your attention. Number one, look at this in this sequence. We have an invitation to what is essentially a Gentile. I mean, Jethro is not a member of the house of Israel. He has been offered to join. He makes sacrifice. He seemingly joins for a little while, and he is encouraged to stay again. Then we have something very interesting happen. And this I do want to show you in Numbers chapter 10. Is it raining outside or something?
Yeah, it's sprinkling.
Oh, goodness. I thought I heard some rain. That's wonderful. I love rain. Do you guys love rain? I know I do. In Numbers chapter 10, come on, computer. If you can see my screen, yes, here we go. Right at the end of Numbers chapter 10, in verse 35, and many of you may have already heard of this. It's quite fascinating to me. It says that this cloud is following them. And here's what it says right at the beginning, the end of chapter 10, verse 35. Then it came about when the ark set out that Moses said, "Rise up, Yehovah, and let your enemies be scattered, and let those who hate you flee before you." And when it came to rest, he said, "Return, O Yehovah, to the myriad thousands of Israel." Now that's a curious thing. But here's something that's interesting. I'm going to switch over to Sephariah so that you can see this in the Hebrew. And I even have a little plug-in that enables me to make drawings on my screen. Isn't that cool? I've circled these two inverted nuns. No, it's not an inverted nun. It's an inverted noon. Now, this right here is the final word in the passage from verse 34. And right here is the end of verse 36. Notice that these two characters are nuns, the Hebrew letter nun, but they're inverted. They're backwards. This is unusual. This is unusual. This is highly unusual in the text. And there's a whole host of traditions and different ideas that have popped up about this. It is said that a noon is representative of a fish. Okay, this is where the Hebrew symbol for a fish came from, that is often associated with Yeshua, as a matter of fact. But as fish is a symbol of life. It's actually like the picture of a fish jumping up out of the water. And when you invert a noon, it is said that this is a representation of eternal life. And that this utterance from Moses is actually quite prophetically significant. And what the rabbis have said is when you look at this in a Sefer Torah scroll, you will see that these two verses are set apart by themselves, apart from the rest of the text, and they are surrounded by these inverted noons. They actually say that this is a whole book of the Torah by itself. These handful of lines form a whole other book, and that's therefore there are technically 7 books of the Torah. You've got Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, the first part of Numbers, the second part of Numbers, Deuteronomy. That's 7 books. These are the 7 pillars of wisdom of God. And this thing right here is actually called a book of the Torah by itself because of that. Now, what does this represent? That this light and this cloud is leading them, and Moses, every time the ark would set out when they were breaking camp and moving out, that he would say, "Arise, Yuvah, and may your enemies be scattered, and may your foes flee from before you." And whenever the ark would come to rest, he would say, "Return, O Yuvah, to the many myriads of thousands of Israel." Some Hebrew scholar, or some Messianic Hebrew scholars have recognized in this some connection to the Messiah, Yeshua, and that these two instances, I would say, speak to the first and the second coming of the Messiah. Because when you think about it, think about this from this perspective. When Yeshua came the first time, the enemies of God were scattered, and the adversary was defeated, and the principalities of the air were defeated. Of course, they still have some influence, but this seems to be speaking of the work that the Messiah did when he came first, rising up from the grave, that his enemies were scattered, and those who hate fled from before him. And then when the ark rests and the return of the Messiah comes, he says, "Return, O Yuvah, to the myriad thousands of Israel." Return to the great, huge group of people that represent Israel. I think it's significant. I think it's certainly interesting that this certainly could be a really powerful prophetic utterance of Moses that does presage the Messiah Yeshua. Now, think about this. You had the invitation to a Gentile family, Yethro. You have this new book of the Torah, almost like an interim period, with the inverted noons and arising and scattering the enemies and returning to the myriad of thousands. And then the very next thing that happens is a fiery judgment. The very next thing that happens in this book is a fiery judgment. Now, I'm going to read this for you from chapter 11, right at the beginning of chapter 11. The very next thing that happens, it says, "Now the people became like those who complain of adversity in the hearing of Yuvah. And when Yuvah heard it, his anger was kindled, and the fire of Yuvah burned among them and consumed some of the outskirts of the camp. The people therefore cried out to Moshe, and Moshe prayed to Yuvah, and the fire died out. So the name of that place was called Taberah, because of the fire of Yuvah that burned among them. And the rabble who were among them had greedy desires, And also the sons of Israel wept again and said, "Who will give us meat to eat? We remember the fish that we used to eat free in Egypt, and the cucumbers and the melons and the leeks and the onions and the garlic. But now our appetite is gone, and there is nothing at all to look at except this manna." Now this is such a powerful portion. I call it the ingrates. Now, a couple of interesting points here. The sages teach this interesting insight that to the faithful, the manna was savory and tasty, and it tasted exactly like what you wanted. But to the faithless, it was dry and tasteless. And that if this manna, as Yeshua said, Moses did not give you the manna from heaven, but my Father gives you the true manna from heaven, which is the Messiah Yeshua and his words. If this is a metaphor for Yeshua and the Word of God, and these people are saying, "Gosh, all we have to look at is this bread from heaven," oh man, I'm not interested in what you've provided. I am not interested in what you. I'm not interested in what you have provided for me. Now, think about this. If the manna represents the Word of God, and we are not interested in the Word of God, this also reminds me of that passage from Timothy, where it says, "In the latter days, the people will not tolerate sound teaching, and they will heap up to themselves teachers who will tickle their ears, tell them what they want to hear. They won't tell them the truth because they can't abide the truth. They just want to hear what they want to hear. They're not interested in the truth of God." And and they begin to complain. And this complaining is contagious. Now, what's interesting to me is, some of these protesters who are out there and burning and looting and whatnot, they're agitating and they're whining about change. You actually have to make change yourself. And, whining and complaining is absolutely the wrong thing to do. What you really need to do when you feel the compulsion to complain about your life or your situation or the situation of somebody that's near you, you can give them some advice. Say, when you feel like complaining, what you really need to be doing is asking a question. You got to ask the question. What is the alternative to complaining? The question, you got to come up with the right question. The alternative is to ask, to seek, to knock. So you've got to present the right question instead of complaining, instead of whining about what you don't have. Ask God for what you need, and think, God has given me everything that I need. Am I just wanting something that I don't have because my lusts are getting in the way? Am I looking with envy on my neighbor that God has given him something different than me, and I am not contented with what God has given me? If you're not contented, look at the reason why. If these people out in the streets are not contented, look at the reason why. They need to be asking the question, why are things like they are? What can we do about it? What can I actually do? There's only one thing you can do if you are politically disaffected in this country, and that is to vote. And unfortunately, we all know that these kids who are out there destroying our cities, they don't vote. They're going about things exactly the wrong way. And they're disaffected. And it's contagious. And we're seeing that here in this Torah portion where the people are mumbling and grumbling. The manna sucks. We wish we had something else. I'm not really interested in what you're providing. And God gets angry when we have this attitude that says, I'm not really interested in what you've given me. And unfortunately, God will often give us what we think we want. And it can be quite painful when you reject what God has given you because you want something else and you keep bugging him about it. And he says, okay, fine. I think this is exactly what happened when they got Shaul as their first king in Israel. That Shaul was the king that they wanted. He was the right king for them in their eyes. He was not the king that God wanted for them. He was the king that they had in their own minds. And they got exactly what they wanted. And it did not turn out well. He was big and he was strong and he was handsome, but he was as unstable as water. And he was vacillating in his allegiance to God. And he quickly turned away and became infested with an evil spirit and began to persecute the chosen of God. But they got what they wanted. And here God says to them, okay, I will give you meat. I'll give you so much meat it will come out your nose. It literally says that in the text. Now, how is that possible? How does meat come out your nose when you're vomiting violently? It is said that these quail became a curse and a great sickness upon the people, and that when they began to eat it in their lust, it became a great plague, and they were vomiting violently, and the quail was coming out their nose. Some have said that they ate it raw, but yeah, it's actually bad stuff. And then that's all I can say about that. Don't be an ingrate.
I gotta just say something here.
Please.
To my own shame.
To your own shame. Don't shame yourself.
We've been having a lot of trouble with insects and spiders at our house, like getting in our house, and we live in a new house, and so it's not under control yet. And it's getting hot and all that stuff is happening. And I hate bugs, like you know me. And I didn't realize how much I hate them until all this is happening. But I was making jokes and just saying, well, I'm about ready to burn the place down. And and they own the house. I just pay the mortgage. And, I'm making jokes, just thinking of being funny. But last weekend we had a scare. There was a fire that we almost had to evacuate for. And it turned out weren't in the area that needed to be evacuated, praise God. But we were packing bags, we were getting ready to get out of here. And I had to stop and go, no, I'm sorry, I did not mean that literally. And then it kind of just put me in check, I need to really be grateful for what I have, even though I'm having a hard time with some things. I'm seriously blessed, and I don't want to burn my house down, But it was a check for me anyway.
Well, God gave you your very own plague of bugs, apparently, to teach you something.
I don't know what, but I'm trying to learn it. It's trying for sure.
I understand. I am not a fan of bugs myself. I get you for sure. Well, that's interesting. I'll be interested to know what the lesson is there for you. If you totally figure it out, you should let us know. Yeah, fascinating. I'm just gonna wrap this up here with this final little section here, and that is Lashon Hara. You all know what that is. It's the evil tongue. So this is also in this section. This is such a huge section, and there's so much information, and I really wish that I had more time to spend with it, and I apologize. But spend some time if you get an opportunity to take a look into some of this stuff more deeply. It's quite fascinating. But unfortunately, in this section, we have Moshe being criticized by Miriam. Um, both are in sin, not Moses, but Miriam and Aaron, because Aaron is listening. The way that this is worded in Hebrew, it says that God became angry at them, but only Miriam is the one who spoke against Moses. The sages derive from that it is not just a sin to speak evil speech, but to listen to evil speech. And that if someone is in your presence talking trash, then you need to, I don't necessarily say that you need to say to them, hey, shut up, or you should stop that. You might, if you have the right relationship with them, say it in a tactful way. Oh, come on, we don't want to talk about that person when they're not here, or something like that. You certainly could do that. But we talked about this before, where Lashon Hara damages three people: the one who speaks it, the one who hears it, and the one that it is about. And so this is, everybody's getting damaged by evil speech. And here's something interesting. And my father is actually in the call here, and I don't mean to kick him under the bus. But Angela's father did the same thing when we were kids. This is something that I think is unfortunately a part of many Christian families when you're growing up. And I know that many of you probably have something similar. And I think it's just human nature all the way around. But when you're driving down the street and somebody is, driving faster than you, and your mom or your dad says, "What is going on with that stupid idiot driving down the street like that?" And you talk a little bit of trash about the neighbors, you try to live a straight and clean life, but your neighbors are scum-sucking pigs, or your neighbor's an idiot, or everybody's an idiot on the street, or when you're out fishing, there's some knuckle dragger who's, drinking a beer, and maybe he dropped his can in the lake. And, my dad would always make these disparaging comments about the people around us. And I know my wife's father did the same thing, and I've heard it many times from other people. It's like we're continuously making comments about the people around us. And what's unfortunate is that I have seen this begin to take place with my own sons. They have begun to look around them, at the people around them, and think that everyone around them is an idiot, and that they're doing something wrong, and that they're not right, and that they're screwed up in some way. Oh, and I tell you, this just, it broke my heart this week as I was studying this, and I'm thinking, man, the sin of Lashon Hara is so powerful, and it is really prevalent in my life. It's not that I hate somebody or I'm talking trash about them deliberately. It's just such an easy thing to fall into, and evil speech can get you put outside the camp. The whole house of Israel had to wait for 7 days while Miriam was outside the camp covered in leprosy, and Moses had to intercede for her. So if you're one of these people who's looking around at your neighbors, or the people driving next to you, or the politicians, or the stupid protesters, be careful. Be careful with your speech. It is such a powerful thing that will reach up and bite you, and can bring a real heap of trouble into your life. And you may not even realize it, but the sin of evil speech is just so prevalent. It is so prevalent. And I pray that each of us will search it out and shut it down to the extent that we can just get control of ourselves. If you can't say nothing nice, don't say anything at all. That's all I have for you, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that it was a blessing for you. Does anyone have any comments, questions, or concerns as we wrap up our study for this evening?